61 months and nearly 2 weeks after the 9/11 attacks, not only is there no memorial to the victims, but more than 4 years after their relatives, their friends, the city, the country were told that there were no more remains of the victims to be found, they have suddenly begun to find more at the World Trade Center. Our number 2 story in the countdown tonight, 36 body parts from an as yet untold number of 9/11 victims recovered today from a single manhole. The total over the past 5 days has now exceeded 150. 9 more manholes, 3 underground service boxes, and 12 more underground sites that were allegedly searched for remains years ago must now be re-inspected if the city can find them. The electric company Con Edison says it is still trying to figure out the exact location of the remaining manholes, which were all paved over in favor of a service road back in 2002. A year and a half after that, the New York City Medical Examiner's Office was still sifting through remains for DNA evidence to try and identify the victims of the 9/11 attacks. Now, 3 years later, the medical examiners will resume their grim tasks, and after the anger subsides, the hopes of thousands that they will finally have a piece of a loved one to bury will grow again. For in this awful process, the ME's office and the victims' families had developed a remarkable bond, one that we first looked at on our special edition of Countdown from September 11th, 2003.
KFWE's Keith Oberman has a live update from New York City.
Body parts found on the 14th floor of the World Financial Center. With the efficiency and dispassion of a bank teller, a woman dispatcher repeats the grim news. Body parts found on the 14th floor of the World Financial Center.
That was the Friday, September 14th, and by then, the grisliness of those discoveries had been superseded by the hope of closure, of identification by DNA.
I spent my entire career looking at dead bodies and looking at the destruction that one human can do to another, but I've never seen anything like this.
For nearly 2 years, Dr. Robert Shaler has led the New York Medical Examiner's Office in its forensic investigation of 9/11. From a small, cramped lab, Dr. Shaler and his colleagues have respectfully but meticulously studied nearly 20,000 human remains. They have sometimes had no more to work with than a single tooth, yet they have identified well over half of all the victims.
I would love to be able to identify everybody, but I don't think that's possible.
The number of identifications has begun to drop. The science is not there, not yet, to identify the remaining 60% of the forensic evidence.
Marie Raganese Sneak.
Michael Paul Ragusa.
The family of New York City firefighter Michael Ragusa was lucky. His remains were not identified, but last November, his parents were reminded that he had given blood. There would be something of Michael Ragusa to bury.
Detail, hand salute.
And what of the others who have nothing or little to inter?
Kenneth Albert Zellman.
Barry Zellman's brother Ken was on the 99th floor of the North Tower that morning. Part of Ken Zellman's right leg was identified. That was all.
We made the decision that enough. It's been 2 years, and now it's time to bury what we have.
His family had held out, hoping for more, just as the medical examiner's office had held out, hoping for more. The families and the scientists have become interconnected in a way no one could have imagined. By some perverse fate, this building, better known as the City Morgue, has become a sacred place for many of the loved ones.
About every 3 weeks, we still have a meeting at the medical examiner's office with families.
They're great people down in the medical examiner's office, and they want to do right for the families.
They're as concerned about our emotions and our well-being as we are for theirs. And so it's become a very close working relationship, almost a family type of relationship.
Thus, the close working relationship now evolves into something new. The medical examiner's office thinks more imaginative ways of DNA matching could identify as many as 200 more victims in the next year. But that would still leave about 1,100 people unidentified. The unidentified remains will be interred, carefully preserved and housed in hopes that someday they will be identified.
I'm hopeful that sometime in the future there'll be technology that can address those samples so that these remains can be returned to the families or maybe even make new identifications from them.
In the interim, they will be kept here, below the memorial that will rise soon enough to all of the dead of the World Trade Center. Their resting places will have no names or gravestones. We will remember nonetheless that they are here.
And my father, William Ralph Robb. I love you, Daddy.
Today, more than 5 years after the attacks, the remains of 1,150 of the victims have still not been identified.